An old woman predicts a murder in a peaceful village, and 4 days later she is proven right. Welcome to Unsolved Mystery Vault. I'm your moderator, Falcon. Drop a comment and tell us where in the world you are watching from. Let's step into Chipping Alderton, where danger hides behind every polite smile.
Episode 1. The Warning Nobody Heeded.
The woman was going to die. Miss Marple had said so on a Tuesday over Earl Grey and shortbread in the garden of Mulberry Cottage. By the following Saturday, she was proven right in the most dreadful possible way. Chipping Alderton was the sort of English village that postcards were made of. A cluster of honeystone cottages, a Norman church with a lopsided weather vane, a post office that smelled of old paper and boiled sweets, and a village green where the annual summer fete had been held for as long as anyone could remember. It was, by all appearances, a place where nothing of consequence had ever happened, and nothing of consequence ever would. The occasion for Miss Marple's fateful prediction had been Mrs. Dorothea Hartwell's annual garden party, held on the first Saturday of June as it had been every year for 2 decades. Mrs. Hartwell, 54, formidably handsome, dressed always in expensive understatement, was the widow of the late Colonel Hartwell and the unquestioned center of Chipping Alderton's social universe. Her garden was her theater. She performed in it beautifully. Miss Marple had arrived early, as she always did, because early arrivals saw things that later guests never noticed. She had settled herself in a white wicker chair near the rose arch with a cup of tea and a view of the entire lawn, her knitting needles moving with gentle, unhurried purpose. She appeared, to the casual observer, to be an elderly woman resting her feet. She was, in fact, cataloguing everything.
The guests assembled in their familiar configurations. Dr. Aubrey Blunt arrived first, a lean, gray-templed man of 60, Dorothea Hartwell's personal physician, and, if the village suspected correctly, something considerably more. He kissed her hand with practiced ease and stood at her elbow in a manner that suggested ownership. He was followed by Mr. Neville Croft, Dorothea's nephew, a 29-year-old of charming vacancy who lived at Hartwell Manor on a private income provided by his aunt. He wore linen badly and smiled too readily. Then came Mrs. Sylvia Price, sharp-featured, immaculate, the vicar's wife, who had hated Dorothea Hartwell quietly and comprehensively for 11 years, for reasons the village had long since stopped speculating about and simply accepted as a permanent fixture of local life. She greeted her hostess with a smile that did not reach her eyes and settled near the hydrangeas with her husband, the Reverend Martin Price, who never seemed fully aware of what was happening around him, unless it involved a hymn. Last to arrive was Miss Cecily Vane, 31, dark-haired, employed as Dorothea's private secretary for the past 3 years. She slipped in through the garden gate with the quiet efficiency of someone who had learned never to draw attention to herself. Miss Marple watched her cross the lawn and noted 2 things. The girl's eyes went immediately to Dr. Blunt, and Dr. Blunt's eyes went immediately away from her. The movement of his gaze was too deliberate to be accidental. The afternoon passed pleasantly. Sandwiches were consumed, compliments were exchanged with the precision of a well-rehearsed play. And then, shortly after 3 o'clock, something small and significant occurred. Dorothea Hartwell had been speaking to Sylvia Price near the sundial when her nephew Neville approached with a glass of Pimm's and an easy grin. He said something low. Miss Marple, 15 feet away, did not hear the words, but she saw what followed. Dorothea's expression shifted. The composed social mask cracked for just a fraction of a second, and in that fraction, Miss Marple saw something she recognized immediately. Not anger, not surprise, fear. Dorothea recovered herself in an instant, laughed, and put a hand on Neville's arm as though nothing had passed between them. But her hand, Miss Marple observed, was trembling. After the party, as Miss Marple was collecting her knitting, Cecily Vane helped her into her cardigan with the unconscious helpfulness of a kind-natured young woman. Miss Marple thanked her and said quite quietly, "I do hope Mrs. Hartwell is in good health." Cecily paused. "She's perfectly well," she said, but her voice was very slightly strained. "I'm pleased to hear it," said Miss Marple, "because I have a feeling, and I have found at my age that one should take one's feelings seriously, that Mrs. Hartwell is in some kind of danger." Cecily stared at her. "That's an extraordinary thing to say." "Yes," agreed Miss Marple mildly. "I do hope I'm wrong." She was not wrong. On Saturday, 4 days after the garden party, Mrs. Dorothea Hartwell was found dead in the library of Hartwell Manor. She was seated in her wing-backed chair, her hands folded in her lap, her face peaceful and remote. A china cup sat at her elbow. The Reverend Price, who had come to collect a charitable donation she had promised the Church Restoration Fund, found her at 9:15. The local police arrived within the hour. Dr. Blunt, summoned as her physician, examined the body and pronounced that her heart had simply stopped. He was certain of this. He was, he said, quite certain. But Detective Inspector Harold Marsh, who had driven down from the county constabulary and who possessed the sort of careful intelligence that was perpetually underestimated because of a mild Yorkshire accent, was not certain at all. He had noticed the china cup. He had noticed the faint smell that lingered near the chair, something almost floral, almost chemical, almost too faint to identify. He had had the cup taken away for analysis. Miss Marple heard about the death within the hour, villages being what they are, and walked to Hartwell Manor at a pace that belied her apparent frailty. She was not permitted inside, but she stood at the garden gate long enough to speak to Mrs. Doris Fenn, the manor's daily housekeeper, who had the extraordinary quality of all great sources of village intelligence. She believed she was being discreet while telling everything she knew. "She had a letter," Mrs. Fenn confided, pulling her cardigan tight. "A nasty one, just yesterday. She burnt it in the grate, didn't she? But she was ever so pale after, and she didn't eat her dinner." "Which grate?" said Miss Marple. "The library," said Mrs. Fenn, and then, as though hearing herself, added, "Not that it matters now, poor soul." It mattered enormously. Miss Marple's needles clicked softly as she walked home. She had told someone Dorothea Hartwell would die. Now she had. And the question that settled over Miss Marple like a cold mist was not whether it was murder, she was quite sure it was, but which of the 5 people at that garden party had known before she did that Dorothea Hartwell's days were numbered. Who sent the letter, and what secret was Dorothea Hartwell carrying to her grave?